Looking at the table of boxing champions by country, you'll notice 3 of the top 11 nations are in South America: Argentina, Venezuela, and Colombia. However, I suspect if you asked mainstream boxing fans to name recent champions from these countries, many would struggle. Take Argentina for instance. Apart from Fernando Martinez, who currently holds the WBA super flyweight title, there are no active world champions in the men's category. Even Sanson Rosa, a promising talent, recently fell short in his bid for the IBA Pro title against Russia's Karaton Agba. Colombia faces a similar decline, with only Eleider Alvarez and Oscar Negrete standing out as notable boxers in recent years. Venezuela, meanwhile, has seen slightly more success. Carlos Antonio Canizales held the WBA light flyweight title from 2018 to 2021, and Jose Uzcategui was the IBF super middleweight champion in 2018, though only briefly. So as you can see, the bar really is pretty low. This decline is surprising given the rich history of high-profile champions these nations have produced. In this video, I'll delve into the key factors behind this downturn to uncover why South American boxers are increasingly scarce on global fight cards. Leave a like for the algorithm, let's get into this. Argentina is a strange case study, having produced many recent female boxing champions, including Nazarena Romero, Evelyn Bermudez, Marcela Acuna, and Alejandra Oliveras, yet the male side is lagging behind. Many will point to Marcos Maidana as the recent centerpiece of Argentinian boxing, boasting a 35-5 record and being quite widely known. But since retiring after his loss to Floyd Mayweather in 2014, there's been few to truly champion the Argentinian cause. This fact is even more surprising when examining the boxing greats previously produced. Take Nicolino Locci, who retired with an astonishing record of 117 wins, 14 draws and 4 losses. Despite smoking 50 cigarettes a day, the Argentine would display some of the best defensive work I've ever seen. Simply untouchable. Or what about Carlos Monzon, who held the undisputed world middleweight title for 7 years in the 1970s, defending it 14 times. Meanwhile, Victor Galindez would hold the WBA light heavyweight title for most of the second half of the 1970s in an especially competitive era. Even Oscar Bonavena warrants a mention, going the distance with renowned heavyweights like Joe Frazier, Floyd Patterson and Ron Lyle. But these Argentinian legends took to the ring many decades ago, with Sergio Martinez being the only 21st century boxer to make most top 10 Argentine boxing lists. But why the drop-off? This is Nicolas Otamendi, an Argentinian footballer who has played for major clubs like Porto, Valencia and Manchester City, as well as the national team. During his teen years, he was touted as a decent boxer, training with his cousin in a gym on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. However, he elected to join Vélez Sarsfield Football Club, and his career took off from there. Now, football has always been popular in Argentina. There's estimated to be around 2.7 million people partaking in the sport, with a total of 311,811 registered players. But what has changed since the 70s is how lucrative a career can be in it. As of 2024, 5 of the top 10 highest paid athletes are football players, and in the Premier League, the average wage sits around $3.8 million per year. Meanwhile, in the Argentinian domestic league, the average is around $214,000 per year, which is still very decent. Therefore, more younger and often poor children are deeming football as an effective avenue to escape their situation, explaining the 11% participation rate compared to just 2.32% in boxing, anything to avoid CTE. Considering this, the pool of boxing talent has likely been slashed considerably. The overall health of new Argentinian generations can also be called into question. A study conducted by the Human Kinetics Journal found an increase in sedentary behaviours, rising obesity levels in those between the ages of 5 and 17, and widely reduced sleep time. This is likely not having the best impact upon future potential boxing stars and sports prospects in general. In terms of Colombia, the decline is perhaps a bit more tragic. Professor David Shannon's article highlights the impact of Colombia's greatest ever boxer, Kid Pambele or Antonio Cervantes, upon the country's boxing system. He was a national hero, and with boxing being a sport where national identity is bound up in how the game is played, Pambele's quick, smart, less formally schooled, and raw intelligence style epitomised the idea of Colombian boxing. This notion that he transformed Colombian boxing is likely credible, especially after October 28, 1972, when Pambele knocked out Panama's Alfonso Peppermint Fraser. He instantly secured national fame, becoming Colombia's first ever world boxing champion, with many looking to emulate him. He was a beacon of hope and resilience for the impoverished people, yet Shannon notes the boxer's eventual fall from grace. Through a tragic decline of substance abuse, squandered riches, and eventually being imprisoned for assault, Shannon writes that the highly racialized African South American attributes that once generated national pride for the boxer now emerged ominously as negative stereotypes around violence, alcohol consumption, and failure. In essence, bad connotations now shrouded boxing. Now, this didn't put off the nation entirely. From 1974 onwards, Rodrigo Valdez became a two-time middleweight champion. From 1985 to 1988, Colombia's Miguel Lora Escudero reigned as the WBC bantamweight champion for 3 years, notably beating the Mexican Daniel Zaragoza, but subsequent disasters in the ring wouldn't help the cause. In April 1993, Colombia's Ruben Palacio would have his WBO featherweight title stripped following a positive HIV test. Then 2 years later, popular Colombian boxer Jimmy Garcia died in the ring, leading to widespread mourning across the nation. Only 2 months later, former WBA flyweight title holder Elvis Alvarez would be shot dead on July 16, 1995 in Medellin. These seismic events, all ultimately connected to boxing, would heavily damage the sport's image and saw the talent pool reduced heavily. And aside from some decent fighters like Bradus Prescott, Edison Miranda and Juan Urango, the 21st century has garnered far less success for the nation. Sports participation statistics make bleak reading, with boxing currently being redundant amongst both sexes in the city of Sincelejo. Football now takes priority. Venezuela's boxing decline, though not as stark as the others, is insanely fascinating. 1950s and 60s Venezuela was rife with violence and crime. In 1959, Caracas police reported 377 missing children, with the lack of schools and absence of municipal officers leading to kids running away and forming dangerous gangs. Violent crime erupted, with society becoming increasingly dangerous. Boxing was deemed as a solution, an effective means to constructively channel young male aggression, with boxing gyms allowing kids to train for free on the premise that if the fighters were successful, a chunk of their earnings would go to the business. Poor youngsters filed into them, deeming it as a potential ticket to financial prosperity. These conditions paved the way for a line of Venezuelan boxing killers. First with Morocho Hernandez in the 60s, before Antonio Esparragoza, Bertulio Gonzalez, Fulgencio Obolmejias, and Vicente Rondon followed in the next decades, all of which won world titles, marking the golden age of Venezuelan boxing. Yet the decline would begin not long after. There was a sequence of 9 quick deaths from July 1979 to September 1983 in the boxing ring, as people became increasingly aware of the link between boxing and brain trauma. David Shannon argues that this increasing awareness was only a marginal contributor to the sport's decline in 1980s Venezuela, but it still played a part. More significantly though, Venezuela experienced a severe economic crisis, leading to an uptick in crime. Venezuela's Madison Square Garden, the Nuevo Circo, began to fall into disrepair as boxing fans in Venezuelan cities had stopped going to live fights due largely to fear of nighttime criminal violence. This effectively gutted local boxing entirely. However, the political establishment played its part in the decline. In 2000, Hugo Chávez's government contemplated banning boxing as violent and exploitative, before instead severely restricting the number of bouts in which a boxer could participate, wrecking their overall development. Televised boxing was blacked out before 11:30 p.m. to prevent kids from watching it, while the Venezuelan-based WBA president Gilberto Mendoza moved to Panama, making governmental permission for organising fights far harder to obtain. This forced several world-class Venezuelan fighters to leave the country and settle elsewhere, including former WBA super lightweight champion Jorge Linares. It basically became a terrible location to make it as a boxing pugilist. A further nail in boxing's coffin came from the Edwin Valero fiasco, winning the WBA featherweight and WBC lightweight titles between 2006 and 2010. Valero seemed unstoppable, racking up a 27-0 record, but after being arrested for the murder of his wife, Valero would put himself to sleep permanently in prison. Then the floodgates opened, with stories containing racist overtones, violence, and drug addiction beginning to smear the boxer's name. Many of these accusations were true, but the main damage was done to the sport's reputation. Boxing had previously been seen as sanctioned violence carried out by impoverished but resilient youngsters seeking positive change, ultimately acting as a bulwark to societal violence. But now it is deemed as being entirely linked to societal violence, somewhat encouraging it, while allowing unstable thugs to legitimize unmitigated aggression. Essentially, Venezuelans began to despise the sweet science as it became blurred with the aggression of their own society, as opposed to being a way of escaping it. But this video only touches the surface of South America's boxing decline, and I'd be happy to make a part 2 if you're interested, just leave a like if so. Anyway, now I want to hear what you guys think. I'm certainly not an expert on South American boxing, and I feel it has been hugely neglected on both YouTube and in the media generally. But having made this video, my primary reasons behind the disappearance of many of their great boxers is a combination of other sports exploding in popularity and affluence, namely football, alongside the image of boxers being tarnished by unfortunate acts. The CTE argument is worth considering, but if an individual is so impoverished that boxing represents one of the sole means of escaping their situation, I think many would still take the risk. But have I missed anything key? Please let me know down in the comments below, and if I make a part 2, I'll probably include them in that. Anyways, thank you so much for watching guys. I really appreciate all the love and support you've given the channel recently, and it'd be great to keep up this momentum, so please like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.